The following graph gives information about average weekly household expenditure. According to this graph, the items include food, medical, transport, and holidays. You can see from this graph that the value of food is 123. And the value of medical care is 50. The value of transport is 124. According to this graph, the value of holiday is 33. As you can also see that the value of housing is 164. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.
The following graph gives information about fast food times a week. The items include everyday, once a week, and never. According to this graph, in several times a week, the value of July 2003 is around 17%, and that of 2013 is lower, which is around 16%. You can see from this graph that the highest value of December 2006 is in about once a week, around 33%. You can also see from this graph that the lowest value of July 2013 is in every day, around 3%. In conclusion, Americans usually eat fast food.
The following graph gives information about fast food consumption by meal. The items include breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. According to this graph, in breakfast, the value is around 22.7%, and that of snack is lower, which is around 22.6%. You can see from this graph that the highest value of lunch is 43.7. You can also see from this graph that the second highest value of dinner is 42%. In conclusion, fast food consumption has four kinds.
The following graph gives information about which economies are really richest. The items include Switzerland, the United States, and Hong Kong. According to this graph, in Australia, the value of average wealth is around $400,000, and that of Netherlands is lower, which is around $300,000. You can see from this graph that the lowest value of median wealth is in Denmark, which is $100,000. You can also see from this graph that the highest value of median wealth is Australia. In conclusion, Switzerland has the highest rank.
The following graph gives information about the world's most powerful passports. The items include countries' names, their ranks and visa-free countries' numbers. According to this graph, in the first row, the value of Japan is 193. And in the second row, the value of Singapore is 192. You can see from this graph that the third highest value is in South Korea, which is 191. You can also see from this graph that the lowest value is in Luxembourg, which is 190. In conclusion, Japan has the most powerful passport.
The following graph gives information about gross national happiness. Information of different areas are displayed on the map. In the central area, there is a large circle named GNH. There are many small circles surrounding the large circle. According to this graph, these small circles are health, time use, education, good governance, community vitality, living standards, psychological well-being and cultural diversity and resilience. And these small circles are respectively red, green, purple, blue, brown, and so on. In conclusion, there are many factors in gross national happiness.
The following graph gives information about Bermuda Triangle in Atlantic. Information of different areas are displayed on the map. In the central area, there is a light blue triangle named Bermuda, whose points are at Florida Peninsula, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda Islands. In the left area, there is Gulf of Mexico and Tropic of Cancer runs through it. According to this graph, the largest area is the mainland of America. In comparison, Caribbean Sea is south to Cuba. In conclusion, there are many seas and islands shown on the map.
The following graph gives information about plastic bottle recycling. The steps include new bottles, refilling, used bottles and plastic processing, and according to this graph, the first step is newly produced bottles, which are empty. According to this graph, the second step is to fill the empty bottles with beverage. You can see from this graph that the third step is to open the bottles and drink up it, followed by the fourth step is to transport used bottles back to the factory and use them as materials. The final step is the plastic materials turn into new bottles waiting for refilling. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.
The following graph gives information about how tomatoes come to consumers. The steps include a tomato tree, transportation, filtering, packaging. According to this graph, the first step is the tomato tree, which grows many tomatoes on the branches. According to this graph, the second step is to transport tomatoes by a green truck. You can see from this graph that the third step is to filter bad tomatoes out on a conveyor belt, followed by a crate full of good tomatoes as the fourth step. The final step is to fill the shopping cart with the good tomatoes for consumers. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.
The following graph gives information about Litchfield population. The horizontal axis is the years, ranging from 1901 to 2011. According to this graph, in the year of 1911, the value is around 8,000. And according to this graph, in the year of 1941, the value is around 10,000. The highest value is around 32,500, which is in 2011. On the contrary, the lowest value is 7,000, which is in 1901. In conclusion, if this trend continues, the Litchfield population will keep rising in the future.
The following graph gives information about compositions of air. The items include oxygen, nitrogen, and other gases. You can see from this graph that, in oxygen, the value is around 20%. You can see from this graph that, in other gases, the value is around 1%, which is lower. You can see from this graph that, in nitrogen, the value is around 79%, which is the highest. You can also see from this graph that, in oxygen, the color is pink. And other gases include carbon dioxide, argon and water vapor. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.
The following graph gives information about a floor plan. The items include a main hall, an office, a kitchen and toilets. You can see from this graph that there is a main hall, which is in the upper area of the plan. You can see from this graph that there are toilets for males and females which are on the right of the plan. You can see from this graph that there is a toilet for the handicapped which is in the bottom right corner with a sign of wheelchair. You can see from this graph that there are a kitchen in the bottom left corner and an office in the middle of the plan. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.
The following graph gives information about different types of recycling. The items include thermal recycling, chemical recycling, and material recycling. You can see from this graph that, in unrecycling, the value is around 1.85 million tons. You can see from this graph that, in material recycling, the value is around 2 million tons, which is higher. You can see from this graph that, in thermal recycling, the value is around 5.2 million tons _, which is the highest. You can also see from this graph that, in chemical recycling, the value is around 0.38 million tons, which is the lowest. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.
The following graph gives information about renewable energy. The items include heating and cooling, transport and power. You can see from this graph that there are two thermometers in heating and cooling _ which is 51% with 10% renewable energy in it. You can see from this graph that there are a ship and a plane in transport _ which is 32 with 3% renewable energy in it. You can see from this graph that there is a plug-in power _ which is 17 with 26 renewable energy in it. You can see from this graph that there is an arrow below power _ which means an increase of the share of renewable energy. It's a beautiful picture and it shows a lot of things. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.
The following graph gives information about Internet users who accessed via mobile phone. The items include 16 to 24, 55 to 64, and 65 plus. You can see from this graph that, in 45 to 54, the value is around 32%. You can see from this graph that, in 35 to 44, the value is around 50, which is higher. You can see from this graph that, in 16 to 24, the value is around 70% _, which is the highest. You can also see from this graph that, in 65 plus, the value is around 8%, which is the lowest. In conclusion, this graph is very informative.